source of life and cause of death. Water can wash away clues, dilute evidence, and conceal corpses. For investigators, water can be a cunning opponent. For criminals, a most accommodating ally. For the perfect crime, just add water. On the surface, Edmonton, Alberta is a quaint, prosperous city, crossed by the deep valley and murky waters of the North Saskatchewan River. If you look a little deeper, you will see a most sinister crime. In a quiet residential neighborhood, you will find a husband, father, and so-called filmmaker who brings his horror movie to life. This case begins with the suspicious disappearance of John Altinger, a sociable 38-year-old who was well-liked by everyone.
It wasn't a person who was involved in anything bad, it seemed. No, John Altinger was just your seemingly normal, everyday individual. He went to work, he came home, and now he was missing.
Altinger's friends are worried that they haven't heard from him. They notify the police on October 17, 2008. In less than a week, the missing person investigation stalls. The file lands on the desk of Detective Bill Clark, a veteran of the homicide squad.
They had received some emails that indicated Johnny had run away with a woman to Costa Rica, and they were wondering because every time they got an email, they would reply and they would never get a reply back from Johnny. And a whole pile of his friends got this email. The friends had gone to his apartment and found that his passport was still there and his suitcases were there. So a passport, very unusual because you're obviously not going to get into these other countries anymore without a passport, you know, even back in 2008. But the other thing was his red Mazda was missing. Things weren't looking good. I mean, nothing obvious. And the one other big thing they had was they had received an email and it gave directions to a garage about how he was going to meet a woman named Jen.
Could the woman that John Altinger was supposed to meet at the garage be the same woman he went to Costa Rica with?
So they had followed the directions. They found the garage. The garage was in a south side neighborhood, middle class, residential neighborhood, nothing unusual about the neighborhood. They went to the garage and the garage was locked up.
The police find out that a man named Mark Twitchell is renting the garage. He agrees to meet them and give them access.
And he tells them about why he rented the garage. And he describes himself as an up-and-coming filmmaker. He had a film crew and equipment, and they had used the garage and done some filming there in September. And he indicated several times to the officers what type of film he was filming, a film about a guy that he called it House of Cards. And the guy was lured to the garage and ultimately killed in the garage. It was an internet luring thing.
Twitchell says the lock on the garage door has been changed and he does not have a key. With his permission, police cut the lock and enter the garage.
You can basically find nothing. It's just an empty garage. There was a table in there, a chair, there was, you know, some shelves with different type of supplies on, lots of cleaning supplies in there. And these were all things that Mark Twitchell, standing at the door, looked in and said, yeah, that's all my stuff.
The police officer asked Mark Twitchell if he's seen or knows John Altinger and if he noticed a red car. Twitchell answers no, without hesitation. The officer then asked Twitchell about a receipt he found in the garage. It was from a hardware store for a lock purchased with a credit card dated a few days earlier.
And we were able to prove where he bought that lock, and we got the receipt and everything, so.
Twitchell is forced to admit that it's his card and apologizes for his poor memory. Caught in a lie, the police take advantage of Twitchell's cooperative attitude and ask him to make a statement at the police station. As a precaution, the police put the garage under surveillance and prohibit anyone from accessing it. Detective Bill Clark reviews the notes from Twitchell's interview. He is looking for anything that might link Twitchell with John Altinger's disappearance.
I remember thinking to myself, going, oh, this Mark Twitchell guy interviewed really well. Like, he's really forward, and he answered all the questions. He had logical answers to those questions. There was no obvious signs of deception I noted in that interview.
Meanwhile, United States Customs confirmed that Altinger did not enter U.S. airspace, which means he did not fly to Costa Rica. Investigators now suspect that John Altinger has met with foul play. Detective Clark and his colleague, Detective Mark Anstey, split up the work. Clark will do the field work and Anstey will do the paperwork. The next step is to search Altinger's apartment.
We sent our IDENT team, or our crime scenes examination team, to Johnny's apartment. Obviously, first step, let's send the experts in, looking for signs of a struggle, signs of blood, any signs of foul play. So that's where we start with. Johnny's apartment, we don't need a search warrant, so we just simply go in, we start doing our examination. Understanding that his friends had broken in. They don't find anything unusual. The same thing the friends found. They find the suitcases, they find the passport, they, dirty dishes. The place isn't filthy, but it's unkept. They do find the printer missing, and his friend said he had a laptop, which was missing.
Investigators request a search warrant for the garage that Twitchell rents, but the judge denies it.
We could not prove that anything had happened to John. Other than he was missing, we couldn't say he was harmed, kidnapped, murdered. We didn't know. So we could not. You need a criminal offense to get a search warrant.
Detective Bill Clark then decides to ask Twitchell to sign a consent form to search the garage. He calls Twitchell at his home in St. Albert, north of Edmonton. Twitchell agrees to sign. Clark organizes a meeting between him and Detective Brian Murphy. Mark Twitchell is very cooperative. He signs the consent form and then volunteers some very surprising information to Murphy.
Well, within 30 minutes, the whole case turns on its head.
While Twitchell goes back to his car to retrieve the new keys to the garage door, Detective Murphy phones the office.
We're sitting there and Brian calls and he says, "You won't believe it. Mark Twitchell just told me he bought a red car off a guy." So we asked Brian, we got a code for "Are you alone?" And he sends back the code that "No, I'm not alone." So we tell Brian, keep talking to him, don't let him go anywhere.
The coincidence is surprising. Altinger's missing car is red, and so is the car Twitchell just bought. Twitchell is now a suspect and must be handled with caution.
Obviously now, we don't want to start questioning the car. We want him on tape, so everything we do is recorded and up front, read again, preparing it for court. So we tell him, come down to the front police station, and Detective Clark will meet you at the front, and we'll do an interview and then get you on your way. Just cover up the red car. Mark's Mr. Cooperative. Twitchell, he just, no problem, I'll do it.
Bill Clark is about to meet a suspect in person for the first time. Will this interview give him insight into what happened to John Altinger? Is Mark Twitchell involved in some way? On Friday, October 10th, 2008, John Altinger sends a strange email to his friends saying he went to Costa Rica with the woman of his dreams. But his friends are suspicious and alert the police. The missing person trail leads to the so-called filmmaker Mark Twitchell. He admits to buying a red car from a stranger, which could be Altinger. Detective Bill Clark invites Twitchell to the police station for an interview.
I meet him at the front, first time I met him. Shake his hand, seems like a nice guy. Nothing unusual about him. We just walk into what we call a soft interview room. And I know it's being recorded. I don't tell people it's being recorded. I'm sure he knew that or may have thought about that. I asked Mark Twitchell, can you write out a statement about what you forgot to tell us? Why don't you just start from when you rented the garage, tell me about your movies, tell me everything all the way till tonight. As far back as it takes, you take as long as you want. So I give him a whole pile of witness statement forms and a pen, and he starts writing.
While detectives Bill Clark and Mark Anstey wait in the observation room, Twitchell writes, page after page.
He writes for over 2 hours, which is unbelievable. I've never had that happen on anybody. So in 8 pages, I have about 6 pages of start in Mark Twitchell, as I describe it, telling me all about his movie business and how great he is and all this filming he's doing. He's supposed to tell me about this red car and how this all came about. I have about 2 paragraphs on the red car, very slim. What he wrote in the written statement about the red car was basically that he's at a gas station, he gets gas, and he parks on the side of the road because he gets a phone call. And a guy comes up to his car and says, knocks on his window and says, yeah, do you want to buy a red car off me for $40? It's his written statement. So I'm thinking, come on, like, this doesn't make sense.
Then Twitchell tells Bill Clark the story in full detail for 2 hours without interruption.
And interesting enough, he describes a guy that looks much like Johnny. You know, this white guy, and he's about 6 feet tall, and he's got the brown hair, and he told me he was running off with his sugar mama, and he wanted to sell his car, and it was right over there in the parking lot.
Twitchell says he asked the guy with the Mazda to drive it to the rented garage. Then Twitchell gave him $40 without drawing up a sales receipt.
That's it. I said, oh, okay, and he says, yeah, and I'm really sorry I didn't tell you guys about the red car. I said, well, you know, it slipped your mind, not a big deal. The whole time I'm thinking, yeah, right. But I go with it.
It's nearly 3 a.m., and Twitchell's story continues. He explains that he called his friend Josh to drive the Mazda because he can't drive manual transmission. Mark Anstey is monitoring the interview. He notes the address Twitchell gives for his friend and immediately sends an officer to look for the car.
So after the question and answer, I take a break. Mark and I have been getting along good, talking up front, very good. I go out and I go, man, this guy is involved up to his neck. I talk to the Detective Anstey and Detective Murphy. They tell me, yeah, we got the red car. We're at Josh's house now. We got officers there. They found the red car. It's on the driveway. I says, okay, good. We got to seize that.
Bill Clark returns to the interrogation room and changes his approach.
I love being the bad cop. This good cop stuff is really tough for me at times to hold it in. I'm like an actor out there going, oh, Twitchell, you're so full of crap, you know, but I'm putting on the straight face, playing, I'm just a dumb cop. You know, Mark, I could really see in the few hours I interviewed him, he thought he was smart. And he thought he was smarter than me, so that worked to my advantage. I'll play with that.
The interview becomes a battle of the minds between Detective Bill Clark and Mark Twitchell.
Because I know where the camera is. I didn't want to block the view because we want to catch his facial expression. We want to catch his body language. And I said, just so you know, again, you want to call a lawyer anytime you can. I say, Mark, I know you're involved in the disappearance of Johnny Altinger. And I don't say anything. Well, there's a 13-second pregnant pause, I call it, where he says nothing. He is like a deer in the headlights. And then Mark goes, whoa, 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 why? And I'm thinking, oh my, what a response that is. Like, you are guilty of something here, buddy. So I sit down after he stumbles with the why, and that's the first time he's really uncomfortable. Well, he just starts to clam up now. Very non-talkative, very pulled back now, sitting back. And at times, you know, he crosses his arms. At times, he's just uncomfortable. Never asked to leave, and I don't offer. I keep talking. Problem is, within 15 minutes, I'm done. I have nothing else to tell him that I know. I says, at one point, I says, you know, you're not going to be able to live with yourself with what you've done. I'm alluding to the fact that he's killed John without saying it. And he makes a comment to me, and he says, you'd be surprised what I can live with.
What did this short comment really mean? Has Twitchell said too much? But Clark chooses not to pursue it. By 6 a.m., they have reached a stalemate. Bill Clark still doesn't have reasonable cause to hold Twitchell, and then he asks to speak to his lawyer. Meanwhile, the investigators fear that Twitchell might try to destroy evidence. They request a warrant to put him under surveillance. When Twitchell's interview is finished, Detective Clark escorts him to his car, where he intends to play his next card.
We get down to the front, and I says, I'm taking your car. And he turns around, he goes, "What?" I says, "I'm taking your car, I'm seizing your car." She turned and was shocked that I was taking his car. And I said, "Yeah, you told me the keys and license plate were in there, so I'm gonna get a search warrant and seize those items." And he says, "Well, I just need to get a couple of things out of it." I said, "You're getting nothing out of that car. Nothing." So he hands me the keys, and I says to him then, I says, "I know you killed him. I'm coming for you, it's just a matter of time." And he just looked at me and turned and walked away. I watched him walk down the street. Mark, as we know, did not go back to his house in St. Albert. He ended up staying at his parents' house in Edmonton, in that North End neighborhood. And by the next day, we had surveillance on that residence, and we're watching Mark Twitchell.
On October 21st, the search of Twitchell's car begins to reveal many surprises.
Well, the search warrant for Mark Twitchell's car was an absolute goldmine. And he had a map, a hand-drawn map on a yellow sticky that led from the garage to Johnny Altinger's apartment on Ellerslie Road. I mean, that's a huge piece of evidence. Why would you have that? He had stickers on there about, actually, that said, he's gonna have sex with his girlfriend. You know, just crazy evidence. They found a laptop computer in that car. You can seize items, but that doesn't give you the right to examine the contents of those items. But now you need a second warrant to search them because you're really invading their privacy then. So we got a second warrant to search the contents of the computer. They found a knife in the car with visible blood on it to the human eye. Pull up the trunk, there's looks to be a red blood stain in the trunk. So this was huge. Now you gotta also realize in the meantime, we're also examining the red car belonging to Johnny Altinger. There is what appears to be red blood in the trunk of Johnny's car too.
Investigators work to create a DNA profile from the evidence gathered from Altinger's apartment.
And you know, it's not like CSI on TV. Basically, they take it to the lab and about 30 minutes later, they got a DNA profile and they know who the bad guy is. Well, in real life, that doesn't happen. That's not the way it works. DNA, average 60 days to get DNA results. You know, depending on the urgency of your case. If they prioritize it, it takes about, in the fastest time, 5 to 7 days doing everything in 2008. The lab ends up developing a profile of a single male on the blood found in the trunk of the car, but the problem is we do not have our missing man's DNA.
The lab manages to extract Altinger's DNA. They begin the comparison of the two DNA profiles from the cars, which they estimate should take about 10 days. Will they discover that the blood found belongs to John Altinger? And if it is his blood, where is his body? The disappearance of John Altinger launches an unprecedented homicide investigation. Dozens of pieces of evidence are collected, including a knife with traces of blood. Everything points to one primary suspect, the so-called filmmaker Mark Twitchell. But without a body, the police can't arrest or charge Twitchell. Then, a dramatic turn of events occurs.
About the fourth day into our investigation, I'm sitting at my desk and Detective Anstey comes down and says, "You will not believe what we got off the computer." The computer had deleted files that were pulled off of the hard drive by our tech crimes unit, and they pulled up a 30-page diary, which basically detailed what we believed was the entire killing of Johnny Altinger. It was a detailed diary. It was called SK Confessions, the document. We felt the title meant Serial Killer Confessions. One of the first lines on the document was, in the first few paragraphs was, "I'm not sure when I decided to become a serial killer, but it was a feeling of pure euphoria." Now it was our job to prove that document was true.
Twitchell calls himself a filmmaker, and the SK Confessions reads like a movie script. Investigators need to establish whether it is fact or fiction.
So what Detective Anstey did was he basically went line by line through this 30-page document and pulled out all the facts as written by Mark Twitchell. And anytime he had a fact, we assigned that as a task to a detective. So there was some, I forget how many there were, it was over 300 points that we felt we could prove or disprove in this document. And detectives were assigned all these tasks to do.
The SK confessions provide the investigators with a possible hypothesis for the sequence of events. The narrator in the script describes how he went about attracting his prey. Bill Clark believes the narrator is Twitchell himself.
Mark Twitchell sets up the Plenty of Fish website on that Friday morning of October the 10th at about 10 o'clock in the morning. He sets up the profile for this Jen character, the blonde girl on the site. Basically, the site is, you know, it's alluding to having sex, a weekend of sexual activities, you know, typical movie stuff. His goal was to lure a single man. His mentality was a single man will not be missed as much. And the one he keyed on was John Altinger, because he matched everything he wanted. The single male was free for the whole weekend. So he made arrangements during that afternoon to meet with John, and he gives him the directions to the garage. So they arrange a time to meet. John's so excited to meet this girl. He drives over and gets there early. And he actually doesn't realize it, but he walks into the garage, the lights are on, the door's half open, and he runs into Mark Twitchell. And Mark describes it in his SK Confessions document. And Mark is an actor and a half. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to meet a girl here. Oh yeah, you must need Jen. Yeah, she just went out for a while. She'll be back in a bit. Oh, and he plays it up that, oh, I'm supposed to meet her, but I'm a little early. And Mark says to him, well, yeah, you can come back. So Johnny leaves.
A few minutes later, Johnny receives an email from Jen, who reschedules their rendezvous.
So Mark describes in his SK Confessions document how now he's wondering, okay, do I carry through? He's now having almost second thoughts. Do I carry through with it or not? Do I go? And then he decides, yeah, I'm going to carry through with it. So John comes back that Friday night, and when he gets there, the door is halfway up, and it's dark now in the garage. And boom. As described in the SK Confessions document, he gets multiple blows over the back of his head with these lead pipes. Mark Twitchell describes it as a tough time for John to go down. And John gets back up again and tries to fight him. But he's so groggy from the blows to the head that Mark Twitchell then describes how he takes out his hunting knife and he says, I plunged it into his gut and it was pure Hollywood. I remember those words, reading those words. It was pure Hollywood. The way John's eyes just bulged and he felt that knife go into him. And he says, I just held it there and he died right in my arms. He then doesn't know what he's gonna do. She goes home in the blood-soaked clothes. He leaves John on the floor of the garage that night, locks the garage up. Pretty bold, like you don't think, you know, you just killed someone, not worried about getting rid of him, and goes home.
In the SK Confessions, the narrator says he returned home around midnight and sneaks into the basement. His wife is asleep upstairs and does not notice. He throws his clothes in the washing machine and goes to bed.
He then goes back the next day is Saturday and he starts his cleanup. So he places John up on the table and he starts cutting him up with the game processing kit. And he talks about humming a song, singing a song, eating potato chips, having a drink of pop while he's doing it, like he's actually enjoying himself. He thinks this is great. He talks in detail about how he's slicing in and how easily the flesh is splitting and how easy it is to cut along the joints, to sever the bones into smaller pieces. And he describes putting him into a green garbage bag. And his whole thing is then he's going to throw him into some body of water somewhere and get rid of him.
The SK Confessions document goes on to describe the disposal of the victim's body.
So he packed the John's remains into the trunk of John's car, the red Mazda. This is when he realizes, oh, the standard, I can't drive it. Shoot, I can't. I'm gonna have trouble with this car. He takes the bags out. Of course, some has dripped out. The blood's in the trunk. And he moves them to his car. So now he has them in his car, and he now drives around for several days with them in his car. He's not sure where to dump them, and he checks out river sites, and for various reasons decides not to dump them in the river, and then comes back and decides it'll be the barrel, the burn barrel. So he takes the barrel and ends up at his mother's house during a weekday in the following week and tries to burn John's remains. And he thought you could burn a body in a 45-gallon drum barrel because that's been seen on many shows. In reality, it takes a lot of heat and that to burn a body. So he's burning this body parts in his barrel. He heard a fire truck siren, and he thought they were coming to his fire. And the neighbor saw the smoke coming out of the barrel and called. So he quickly dumps the barrel out, puts the fire out, and drags the remnants of the plastic and the body parts and throw them in his parents' garage, expecting fire department to arrive.
But the firefighters don't arrive. They were dispatched to another fire a few blocks away.
And what was frustrating was the document, the 30-page diary or whatever it was, ended before it said where he dumped the body. And the script went all funny on the page, and it was where they were pulling it off a deleted file. And we kept going to him, you gotta find more. There's only a few more pages to this. And he's gonna describe where he dumped the body.
The SK Confessions lead investigators to suspect that Twitchell used Altinger's internet accounts to send forged emails to his friends so they would believe he was still alive. But Twitchell's writing obviously wasn't good enough to convince them. Can forensics recover the last pages of the SK Confessions and reveal where the body was dumped? Will the DNA results confirm the blood in the car is John Altinger's? In Edmonton, police are accumulating an impressive number of exhibits in the John Altinger case. The suspect, Mark Twitchell, has written what seems to be a detailed diary of the murder. However, the body of the victim is nowhere to be found. Police wait impatiently for confirmation that the blood found at the scene of the crime is that of John Altinger. They also hope that forensic experts can successfully extract the missing pages of the SK confession from Twitchell's computer. At Mark Twitchell's home in St. Albert, the forensic team finds drops of blood on the washing machine, on his belt buckle, and on a pair of jeans. They easily discover a painted hockey mask that is the exact match for the one described by the murderer in the SK Confessions. The garage that Twitchell rented is a wealth of evidence. There is little doubt that this is the crime scene. Forensic technicians spray luminol to test for blood. The entire garage begins to glow under the black light.
When you first walk in and look, you wouldn't notice it. It's really tough to see. You need to really get your light down and take a good look and know what you're looking for.
This type of blood spatter is well known among specialists. Annie Sauvageau, a forensic pathologist, describes how it is produced.
When someone is hit in the head with a blunt weapon, for example, with a metal bar or a baseball bat, the scalp will open under the impact of the weapon. It's what we call a laceration. After the first impact, there won't be bleeding yet, and won't be any blood spatter either. But after the first shot, the scalp that just opened is going to bleed, and the scalp and hair will be soaked with blood. And the second shot, and the following shots at the moment when the weapon hits the head, blood will splash from all the blood that's collected like a sponge by the hair and the wound.
And he was able to determine from the blood spatter the height of the blows, how many blows, different blows there could have been, that type of thing.
The evidence once again matches the SK confessions. Twitchell writes that the killer uses metal pipes because it was more effective than a stun gun.
The pipes were also found in the garage. They had, the one pipe had John's blood on the end of it. It was a threaded pipe, and there was actually, you could see to the naked eye, brain matter inside the end of the pipe. It was an open-ended pipe. There was a green case which had a game processing kit in it, which is for processing big game. As a hunter, you shoot a moose in the bush, you go out and you chop it up. You open the kit, every single tool, I don't know how many are in there, 6 or 8, had blood on it. That's what he used to carve up Johnny. So off to the side, the 45-gallon drum barrel was next to the table, and it had the burn marks on the drum barrel from stuff being burned in it. There was a lot of cleaning supplies in there. There was rubber gloves, there was sheets of plastic, there was different, I don't know if it was bleach or what it was, but some, cleaning supplies like that. Paper towels, things of that nature.
Finally, the experts in the computer forensics unit are able to rebuild the final pages of the SK confessions.
Get about another 4 pages. And those 4 pages now describe that he's dumped the body in a sewer in a suburb of Edmonton.
The exploration of the city's sewer system begins. It's an immense undertaking. The forensic examination of Twitchell's computer is now complete, but investigators were hoping to discover one last piece of evidence.
We thought from the start that Mark Twitchell had filmed the murder. We thought that was his motive, that there was a snuff film basically made on the murder of Johnny, and we were going to find that on a hard drive. When we got the written document, though, there was no indication in the written document that he had filmed it. It was just his plan and his excitement about becoming a serial killer.
Since his interview with Detective Clark, Mark Twitchell has been hiding in his parents' house. He communicates with the outside world primarily through the internet.
And during that time, we started a undercover operation where we started contacting Mark Twitchell on the internet. Because one of the things we learned during that next week, as the investigation progressed, was that Mark Twitchell had bilked several of his friends out of thousands of dollars. He had convinced his friends and several associates that he had a $3.5 million trailer-type film he was going to make. We know of 3 people that invested $35,000, and Mark lived off that money. He had a website, I believe it was called Express, with an X, Express Entertainment. And we went on that website and pretended we were going to be investing with it. And one of the reasons we did that, we were worried based on the document that he had written that he wanted to be a serial killer and he could potentially go out and kill someone else while we're still gathering the evidence to charge him.
Investigators finally get DNA results that link the blood found in Mark Twitchell's car and rented garage to John Altinger.
Everyone's pumped. It's done, the rest day, it's time to haul his butt in. So we go on the internet and we have our undercover operator arrange to meet him at a coffee shop in the neighborhood of his parents' house. So Mark walks out of his house and he gets taken down, and the tactical guys are in a big van and they just hop out. They got their balaclavas on, their submachine guns, and they're all over him. He's so scared he urinates in his pants. He pisses himself. He's so scared.
Police hold Twitchell in custody before they transfer him to the remand center. Investigators use this time to convince Twitchell to confess where he dumped the victim's body parts. For 8 hours, Bill Clark presents Twitchell with an overwhelming list of all the evidence gathered against him. But Twitchell says nothing. The prosecutor finally brings Twitchell before a judge. He is accused of the first-degree murder of John Altinger and is put in custody. As they prepare the case for trial, the detectives decide to search for another potential victim mentioned in the SK confessions. They send police door to door and make an appeal through the media showing the goalie mask.
That afternoon, I got a phone call from a guy who says, I think this is one of my employees. He told me about it. I says, okay, who is it? He says, his name's Gilles Tetreault. I says, you need to have Gilles contact me. I need to talk to him. And Gilles did, and he came in the next day. It was, without a doubt, the most riveting witness interview I've ever done in my career as a police officer.
7 days before murdering John Altinger, Twitchell made a failed attempt on another victim. Gilles Tetreault was also lured through the online dating site Plenty of Fish.
Gilles gets to the garage, and he crawls underneath the door, and it's dark. And he says, I remember thinking to myself, ooh, this is a little odd. But he's so pumped up about meeting this supposed great-looking blonde girl that he's gonna walk through the garage. And then he sees this guy standing in front of him with this hockey mask. And, you know, he's scared. He's scared beyond belief.
Twitchell attacks Tetreault with a stun gun and forces him to the ground. Tetreault fights back as Twitchell tries to immobilize him. Tetreault sees his life flash before his eyes and fights back with every ounce of strength. He manages to break free and escape. When the attack occurred, Gilles Tetreault was not willing to inform the police. Mark Twitchell is now in custody where he stays quiet. With the overwhelming evidence against him, the court decides to bypass the preliminary hearing and go directly to trial. It is scheduled for March 2011. The SK confessions say that John Altinger's remains were dumped into a sewer. But where in Edmonton's 5,500 kilometers of sewers could they be exactly? Mark Twitchell lures John Altinger to a garage in South Edmonton and murders him. He drew inspiration from the fictional TV serial killer Dexter, who is famous for dismembering his victims and dumping their remains in water. A document found by the police describes the murder in detail. The police can only search a few of the thousands of kilometers of sewers below the city of Edmonton. Mark Twitchell shuts down after his arrest and refuses to reveal where he dumped the remains.
We still didn't have John. We couldn't bring closure to the family. About 2 weeks after his arrest, I went to the Remand Center and we visited Mark Twitchell, simply to try to find the location of the body. He was mad. He says, you guys just don't get it, do you? You know, stuff like that, comments like that.
Detective Bill Clark is not so easily discouraged. He visits Twitchell regularly to try to find out where the body was dumped.
I always thought this was a good comment. He just says, you know, Mark, you have no mitigating circumstances going in your favor. The only thing mitigating for you would be to give us the body back, give us the victim. That's the only thing that might look good for you in court. So we now go another year. It's June, I believe, of 2010. Out of the blue, we get a phone call to our office from Mark Twitchell's lawyer stating that Mark wants to give us something. And I went, oh, he wants to give us the body. It's the only thing we don't have. I couldn't believe it. It was just like out of the blue, almost 2 years later.
Mark Twitchell's lawyer then gives a printed map to police. Twitchell had marked it with the location of Altinger's remains, which was near his parents' home. Ironically, this was just outside the extensive area that was originally searched by investigators.
We ended up going there that night, and we pulled the man cover off, and it was just like he described. And we could see what looked like body parts in the bottom. Tough to tell. Take your flashlight and have a look. So we called the crime scenes unit. Of course, they set the van up, and they're there for 2 days going through that.
When the search is complete, very few of the body parts are recovered. They are in an advanced state of decomposition, which is characteristic of remains that have spent years in water.
Adipocere will occur in an environment that's very humid, for example, in marshes or sewers. At the moment the body is exposed to a very fluid, very watery environment, you'll have a chemical transformation of its fat, which becomes like a large mass of rancid butter. The benefit to the forensic pathologist is that in this state, the body will be better preserved for longer than if it was just in a field exposed to the sun, animals, or wind. However, on the other hand, a sewer could also have rats.
Police recovered the victim's torso, pelvis, a few bones, and a tooth. The remainder were probably flushed out of the sewers into the river, but they have enough to identify the remains.
It's still possible to establish DNA from the bone itself, or from the teeth. The teeth are also a very good environment, and they'll preserve DNA for a very, very long time.
The DNA profile proves that the remains belong to John Altinger. Now the investigators are ready to present their evidence at the trial. Not only have they succeeded in recovering the victim's body, but they have also established how the murder was committed. Investigators broke down the SK confessions into nearly 300 statements and set out to prove or disprove each and every one. Bill Clark and his team were very successful.
I mean, this took months to do. But by the end of the investigation, it was something like 86% we were able to prove were true.
The trial opens to a media frenzy. Everyone wants to know more about Mark Twitchell's strange relationship between reality and fantasy, how he lured his victims through social media, the brutality of the murder, and of course, SK Confessions, Twitchell's personal diary of the murder.
Most trials are quite boring because, the Crown has to be very detailed and they have to establish all the facts and, what everyone's doing and, how they found the evidence and everything like that. This case, with the exception of one day, every single day was compelling.
The jury condemns Twitchell to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. Detective Bill Clark is satisfied with the verdict, but cannot hide his concern.
In Canada, as usual, he could be out after 25 years. Can you imagine that guy at 55? Could be out and he'll know all the mistakes he made and his thoughts aren't going to change. But how can you ever let a guy like that with that mindset out of jail?
It is difficult to grasp how a seemingly normal person like Mark Twitchell could commit a murder so gruesome. It seems that Mark Twitchell lived a fantasy life through fictitious characters, such as Dexter Morgan, the TV serial killer who kills other serial killers. But is it right to blame film and television for Twitchell's behavior?
There are millions of people who watch Dexter and similar sort of shows, be it violent shows or things with a vigilante theme. And the vast majority of those individuals don't ruminate about it. They don't obsess about it. They don't have any inclination to bring that sort of fantasy or fictitious element into their real life.
What Dr. Liam Ennis finds troubling in Mark Twitchell's case is that the motive for the murder is simply to kill for the sake of killing, for the pleasure of it.
We're talking about a homicide here that was not committed for money. It was not committed to keep a secret. It was not committed out of some sort of passion or specific revenge against an individual. And that's why you have to think that individuals like that, when that's the motivation for the killing, is those feelings of superiority. You can see why they go back to the drawing board and do it again. They never get a buzz like that or a thrill like that from anywhere else in their lives, nor does the actual commission of the crime ever quite live up to the fantasy.
Twitchell failed with his first attempted murder of Gilles Tetreault, but he was successful the second time with John Altinger. Does that make him a serial killer?
We do believe that we caught him on his first murder, but we also do believe he would have carried on based on the knowledge we learned about Mark Twitchell over the following months.
This crime played out on the thin border between reality and fiction. On the surface, a normal suburban rendezvous between a man and a woman looking for a relationship. And beneath the surface, the monstrosity of a sick mind, the pleasure of killing, and the foul waters of the city's sewers.